Lecture 3 in text linguistics is devoted to the discussion of basic notions of text and the problem of textual categories. Text is a sequence of verbal utterances created by a locutionary act for illocutionary purposes. In other words, text is a sequence of sentences created by the writer or the speaker for extra-linguistic purposes. It represents a functionally completed, meaningful communicative unit which fits both linguistic and non-linguistic contexts and is characterized by the wholeness of its surface structure and underlying logical meaning. Text is organized according to the structural peculiarities of the given language. However, it is not sufficient for the text to be well formed structurally and semantically. Text is the sequence of only such utterances which can perform communicative function or participate in performing it. Hence, from the functional viewpoint, text can be formed of a verbal unit of any length, be it a sequence of semantically interrelated sentences, one simple sentence, a phrase, or even a word, if it can perform a communicative function. Accordingly, help, fire, no smoking, slow, keep out, a literary narrative text, or a novel all represent different types of texts. British scholar Michael Halliday writes that text is language in use. It implies that text is a speech product, whereas language exists as a system of virtual signs that represent building material for the text. In other words, language system provides the writer or the speaker with abstract models by which they convert their ideas into a text. If we apply Saussure's antinomy language versus speech, text should be treated as a speech entity since it is produced as a result of actualizing different language units in speech. We have already mentioned that text as a communicative verbal unit has its peculiar characteristics. Textual characteristics are first of all predetermined by the whole set of such factors as the communicants comprising both the writer or speaker and the reader or hearer, the text with the help of which they interact, the place and time of the communication, the correspondence between the textual world and the world of reality, and so on. Now, this means that while analyzing a text, we should focus on the features that completely differ from lingual units proper. The set of all these and other similar extra-linguistic characteristics has led to the development of pragmatics as an inseparable branch of communicative linguistics. At present, text linguistics and pragmatics represent two interdependent aspects of discourse analysis, be it conversations or written texts. According to the three-dimensional model of semiotic analysis, which is known in linguistic literature as the Peirce-Maurician model of analysis, pragmatics studies the relationships between the language and its users, to be more precise, between the lingual signs and the users of these signs, while syntax studies the relationships between lingual signs and semantic studies the relationships between lingual signs and the entities in the world to which they apply. And this three-dimensional linguosemiotic model only pragmatics allows humans into the analysis of text. According to some scholars in philosophy of language, pragmatics should underlie any linguistic analysis. This is an empirical discipline that applies the results of both various scientific researches and verbal behavior of communicants. The advantage of studying text via pragmatics is that it necessarily involves the interpretation of people's intended meanings, their assumptions, their purposes or goals, and kinds of actions, for example, such as request, order, stating facts, that they're performing in a particular context, and how the context influences what is said. It requires a consideration of how people organize what they want to say in accordance with who they are addressing to, where, when, and under what circumstances. It should be noted that in text linguistics, the term context indicates the physical environment in which lingual signs are used. That's the extra-linguistic situation of the speech act, while code text is used to indicate the linguistic environment of lingual signs. Pragmatic approach to text analysis also involves the study of how listeners or readers should make inferences about what is said in order to arrive at an interpretation of the speaker's or the writer's intended meaning. Inferencing being the listener or the reader's use of additional background knowledge to make sense of what is not explicit in the text. In other words, this type of analysis explores how a great deal of information is implied in the text without its explication. The big disadvantage of pragmatic approach to text analysis is that all these above-mentioned aspects of textuality are connected with human factors, and because of it, they are extremely difficult to analyze in a consistent and objective way. Thus, text linguistics considers a text as a linguosemiotic unit that can perform communicative function. With written texts, some of the problems associated with spoken transcripts are absent. We do not have to interact with people all speaking at once. The writer usually has time to think about what to say and how to say it, and sentences are usually well formed in a way that utterances of natural, spontaneous talk are not. However, the overall questions remain the same. What norms or rules do people adhere to when creating written texts? Are texts structured according to recurring principles? Is there a hierarchy of units comparable to acts? Are there any conventional ways of opening and closing texts? All these regularities find their realization in different textual categories. According to Robert de Bogrand and Wolfgang Dressler, a text is defined as a communicative occurrence which meets 7 standards of textuality. If any of these standards is not considered to have been satisfied, the text will not be communicative. Hence, non-communicative texts are treated as non-texts. These standards are the following. The first standard is called cohesion, and it concerns the ways in which the components of the surface text, that is, the actual words we hear or see, are mutually connected within a sequence. In linguistic literature, cohesion is defined as the use of explicit linguistic devices to signal relations between sentences and parts of the text. There are two main types of cohesion: grammatical and lexical. Halid and Hassan's work, Cohesion in English, is considered to be the most influential account of this phenomenon. These scholars identify 5 general categories of cohesive devices that create or signal coherence in text. They are reference, ellipsis, substitution, conjunction, and lexical cohesion. For instance, wasn't 6 apples, put them into a fireproof dish. This text is coherent because them in the second sentence clearly refers back to apples and the first. By itself, either sentence would not mean the same as they do together, and in fact, the second sentence without its contextual reference would not make much sense. A text may be cohesive without necessarily being coherent. Cohesion is determined by lexically and grammatically overt relationship between sentences, whereas coherence is based on logical and semantic relations. The second standard of textuality is coherence. According to the Webster's New Dictionary, coherence is the quality of being logically connected and intelligible. Coherence is defined as connectivity of underlying meaning of the text, while cohesion is the connectivity of its surface structure. Hence, both cohesion and coherence are text-centered notions designating operations that are directed at the text materials. Bogrand and Dressler define coherence as continuity of senses. It concerns the ways in which the components of the textual world, that is, the configuration of concepts and relations which underlie the surface structure, are mutually accessible and relevant. A concept is definable as a configuration of knowledge, cognitive content, which can be recovered or activated with more or less unity and consistency in the mind. Relations are the links between concepts which appear together in a textual world. Each link would bear a designation of the concept it connects to. Coherence is not a mere feature of text, but rather the outcome of cognitive processes and inferences made by the text users. Reading a text is far more complex than creating links across sentence boundaries and pairing and chaining together items that are interrelated by referring to the same entity. Cohesion is only a guide to coherence, and coherence is something created by the reader in the act of reading the text. Coherence is the feeling that a text hangs together, that it makes sense, and that it's not just a jumble of sentences. As Michael McCarthy indicates, the sentences "Clara loves potatoes, she was born in Ireland" are coherent only if the reader already shares the stereotype ethnic association between being Irish and loving potatoes. So, Cohesion is only part of coherence in reading and writing, and indeed in spoken discourse too, for the same processes operate there. The cohesion of surface texts and the underlying coherence of textual worlds are the most obvious standards of textuality. They indicate how the component elements of the text fit together and make sense. Even so, they cannot provide absolute borderlines between text and non-text in real communication. People can and do use texts which, for various motives, do not seem fully cohesive and coherent. The attitudes of text users should therefore be included among the standards of textuality. A language configuration must be intended to be a text and accepted as such in order to be utilized in communicative interaction. These attitudes involve some tolerance toward disturbances of cohesion or coherence as long as the purposeful nature of the communication is upheld. The production and reception of text functions as discourse actions relevant to some plan or goal. Accordingly, Bogrand and Dressler introduced the notion of intentionality as the third standard of textuality to subsume the intentions of text producers. In the most immediate sense of the term, the producer intends the language configuration under production to be a cohesive and coherent text. Some situations may place such limits on time and processing resources that this intention is not fully realized by the presentation. For example, cohesion is lacking on occasion in conversation. In a wider sense of the term, intentionality designates all the ways in which text producers utilize text to pursue and fulfill their intentions. An extensive body of research has been devoted to intentions in various disciplines, such as sociology, psychology, philosophy, and artificial intelligence. The function of text is seen somewhat differently in these several fields. Sociologists would explore the use of text in speech exchange system where participants interact and allot speaking terms. Psychologists would emphasize the text producer's intention to guide the consciousness of the hearer. Philosophers have argued that a text producer who means something by a text intends the utterance of the text to produce some effect in an audience by means of the recognition of this intention. And artificial intelligence researchers are concerned with people's plans and goals in order to better analyze the meanings of words whose subtlety lies in their intentions rather than in their physical manifestations, and so forth. The fourth standard of textuality is acceptability, which implies the text receiver's attitude in communication. In the most immediate sense of the term, text receivers must accept a language configuration as a cohesive and coherent text capable of utilization. Like intentionality, acceptability includes a tolerance range for such minor discontinuities or disturbances provided the continuity can be restored by reasonable problem solving, as in this example below, which represents a dialogue between a railway official and a customer. When is the Windsor train? To Windsor? Yes, 3:15. The customer's opening question is ambiguous, since in this situation, intentions to find out about trains either going or coming from Windsor would be equally reasonable. The official at once reformulates the troublesome part of the question into a determinate format. In a wider sense of the term, acceptability would subsume acceptance as the active willingness to participate in a discourse and share a goal. Acceptance is thus an action in its own right and entails entering into discourse interaction with all attendant consequences. With written text, acceptability involves the reader's inferencing activities that illustrate how text receivers support coherence by making their own contributions to the sense of the text. If acceptability is restricted, communication can be diverted. It is therefore taken as a signal of non-cooperation if a text receiver raises questions about acceptability when the text producer's intentionality is obviously in effect. The fifth standard of textuality is informativity. Linguists use the term informativity to designate the extent to which a presentation is new or unexpected for the receivers. Every text is at least somewhat informative, no matter how predictable form and content may be. There will always be a few variable occurrences that cannot be entirely foreseen. Particularly low informativity is likely to be disturbing, causing boredom or even rejection of the text. A considerable contribution to the study of this textual category was made by those Czech linguists who belonged to the Prague linguistic circle. They focused on the functional, that's communicative informative aspect of language. Czech linguists Danish, Firbas and others worked out a theory known as functional sentence perspective that formed the cognitive basis for the communicative, that's informational development of the text, and showed how the semantic and syntactic structures of the sentence function in fulfilling the communicative purpose intended for the sentence. They disclosed that the relations of thoughts to each other and mental processes underlie the informational development of the text and affect the arrangement of words in sentences. In other words, they succeeded to uncover the organizing principles in language that account for the ordering of information in discourse beyond the level of the sentence. According to this theory, each sentence functionally proceeds from the previous one, pushing the information from the given or known topic called the theme to the actual new information called the rime. Masesius, writing in the 1930s, defines the term theme under two concepts. One, as the starting point of the utterance, that which is known or at least is obvious in the given situation and from which the speaker proceeds. And the other, as the foundation of the utterance, as something that's being spoken about in the sentence. Accordingly, rime is what the speaker says about or in regard to the theme. the starting point of the utterance. Theme is, therefore, something that can be logically gathered from the previous context, while rhyme expresses something unknown from the previous context, something new that pushes the message forward. Theme-rhyme distribution of information shows clearly that it's impossible to limit linguistic analysis to sentence structure, that functional analysis of language unit requires a textual level. Scholars focus on the importance of themes and topics in text building, claiming that the information that is contained within the themes of the various sentences of a passage correlates with the method of development of the passage. The thematic organization of the text is closely connected with its coherence or connectivity. A text is defined as text largely in terms of its semantic coherence. However, it is useful to remember that texts are not always perfect. They not only display coherence to an uneven degree, but some may be characterized as discontinuous. The reason for less than optimal coherence may be that the speaker or the writer is simply not controlling the mass of information that is successively accumulated as the text unfolds. This mass of information is mostly so extensive that the speaker or the writer necessarily makes a choice, and this choice, as Danish claims, is determined directly or indirectly by the selection of the utterance theme. Danish's basic assumption is that text connexity is represented, among other things, by thematic progression. By this he means the choice and ordering of utterance themes by their mutual contamination and hierarchy, as well as their relation to the hyperthemes of the superior units, such as a paragraph, chapter, etc., to the whole text or to the situation. As Danish indicates, thematic progression might be viewed as the skeleton of the plot. The sixth standard of textuality is situationality, and it concerns the factors which make a text relevant to a situation of occurrence. The sense and use of the text are decided via the situation. Situationality even affects the means of cohesion. Bogrand and Dressler illustrate this textual standard on the example of the following words: slow children at play. This text can be interpreted in two ways according to the situation where it's presented. Someone might conceivably construe it as a notice about slow children who are at play, so that unflattering conclusions should be drawn about the children's intelligence or physical fitness. This note would look quite natural somewhere near a sanatorium or some medical institution. But in the street, where it represents a road sign, the more likely reaction would be to divide the text into slow and children at play, and as a result, drivers would reduce speed to avoid endangering the playing children. It's far more reasonable to assume that slow is a request to reduce speed rather than an announcement of the children's mental or physical deficiencies. Pedestrians can tell that the text is not relevant for themselves, because their speeds would not endanger anyone. In this manner, the sense and use of the text are decided via this situation. The seventh and last standard of textuality is intertextuality. Bogrand and Dressler introduced the term intertextuality in text linguistics in order to subsume the ways in which the production and reception of a given text depends upon the participant's knowledge of other texts. This knowledge can be applied by a process describable in terms of mediation. The greater the expanse of time and of processing activities between the use of the current text and the use of the previously encountered text, the greater the mediation. For instance, a driver who has seen the road sign about slowing down is likely to see another sign further down the road, such as resume speed. One cannot resume something unless one was doing it at an earlier time and then stopped it for some reason. So, it is clear that the sense and relevance of these texts presented as road signs are interdependent and therefore intertextual. Intertextuality is found in mixed types of texts which combine the features of different functional semantic types of text, such as descriptive, narrative, and argumentative texts. And finally, the main issue in intertextuality is text illusion, the ways people use or refer to well-known texts. In principle, a text producer can draw upon any available text, but in practice, well-known texts are more suitable as being more readily accessible to the receiver audience. Thus, we have given a brief review of the standards of textuality, the set of which determines the linguistic status of text as a communicative verbal unit of the highest rank. These standards, being obligatory for any text, will devote the rest of our lectures to their detailed analysis. Traditionally, we finish our lecture with a list of references.